Somewhere in the next hour, a person is going to sit down at a table with people who love them, take a bite of something completely ordinary, and be dead before anyone clears the plates. There will be no warning, and there will be no sound, because a choking person cannot speak, cannot shout, often cannot even cough, since all three of those require air moving through a passage that is now sealed shut by a piece of food. The one thing you would do if you were dying at dinner is the exact thing your body has been disconnected from doing. You would stand up, silent, hands at your throat, and hope somebody understood what silence meant. About 8 centimeters below your jaw, the tube carrying your food crosses directly over the opening to your lungs. Everything you eat for the rest of your life passes over that opening. Every swallow is a controlled near miss. From an engineering standpoint, this is a terrible design. If the airway is completely blocked, consciousness fades in about 2 minutes and brain damage begins in 4. It leaves bystanders with the length of a pop song to solve a life or death problem. This anatomical bottleneck is responsible for thousands of deaths a year, clustering heavily around toddlers, whose airways are roughly the exact diameter of a hot dog, and the elderly, where weakened, swallowing muscles lead to aspiration pneumonia, a quiet killer in care homes. So why didn't evolution fix this? Why do we have this fatal intersection in our throats? To understand why, you have to look at other animals. Almost every mammal has this same crossed wiring, but almost none of them choke to death like humans do. Usually we blame the flap. The epiglottis is a leaf-like piece of cartilage that acts as a lid, folding over your airway every time you swallow. People assume choking happens because the lid just closes too late, but that doesn't explain the real problem. Your dog has an epiglottis, eats incredibly fast, barely chews and rarely chokes. The real culprit isn't the flap, it's the distance. In most mammals, the larynx or voice box sits high up in the throat, essentially locking into the nasal passage. Food passes safely around it, but in humans, the voice box sits much lower, creating a long, shared, open corridor where food and air mix. What's crazy is that you weren't born this way. Human infants have the animal setup, a high, safe voice box that allows them to nurse and breathe through their noses at the same exact time. But between 3 months and 3 years of age, your body deliberately dismantles this safety feature, dropping the larynx down and opening up that dangerous shared hallway. To be fair, the original crossing of the tubes isn't uniquely human. That's an evolutionary receipt from 400 million years ago. Back then, ancient fish in oxygen-poor waters started gulping air at the surface. They didn't have lungs, so a small pouch grew out of their digestive tract to hold that air. That pouch eventually evolved into lungs. Because our respiratory system is essentially a highly modified pocket of our digestive system, the door to our lungs will always open into our food tube. Every land vertebrate is stuck with this plumbing. But humans are the only ones who made the throat significantly longer and more dangerous. For decades, anthropologists had a primary theory for why we did this: speech. When the larynx drops, it creates a unique 2-part resonating chamber, one in the mouth, one in the throat. By moving your tongue around in that space, you can act like an acoustic instrument, amplifying some frequencies and dampening others. This is what allows humans to produce incredibly distinct, stable vowel sounds. This setup allows us to fire off 10 to 15 distinguishable sounds per second. It allows us to move complex ideas from one human brain to another, building upon knowledge generation after generation. Under this theory, the risk of choking was simply the evolutionary tax we paid for language, mathematics, and global civilization. But if the design is so flawed, why couldn't evolution just give us speech and separate the tubes entirely? Because you can't replumb a house while people are living in it. Swallowing involves 24 muscles and 5 cranial nerves executing a sub-second sequence. Any random mutation that completely separated the tubes would likely break the swallowing mechanism before it fixed it. Evolution works with what it has. In fact, we know exactly what it cost to fix this problem because one mammal actually did. Dolphins completely separated their airways from their food tubes. Their larynx extends up into a rigid tube that locks permanently into their nasal passage, leading to their blowhole. A bottlenose dolphin cannot choke on a fish, but look at the price they paid. A dolphin cannot ever breathe through its mouth. More importantly, it lost the ability to breathe automatically. Because an unconscious animal underwater would drown, breathing for a dolphin is a deliberate, conscious act. They can never be fully unconscious. They have to sleep with half their brain awake, one eye open for their entire lives. So for humans, keeping the shared tube was the path of least resistance. But recently, the classic "we choke because we speak" theory has been heavily challenged by new science. Researchers X-rayed roaring red deer, koalas and big cats and found that they also pull their voice boxes down into their throats, not to speak, but to lower their vocal frequencies. In the animal kingdom, a deeper voice fakes a larger body size, which is great for intimidating rivals. This aligns perfectly with human biology. Human males experience a second dramatic dropping of the larynx during puberty. If the dropped larynx was purely for complex speech, women wouldn't be able to speak as clearly as men, which is obviously false. Furthermore, recent computer modeling of macaque monkeys shows that their throats are actually already capable of producing human-like vowels. They just lack the brain wiring to sequence them. If this new research is right, our throats didn't evolve this way to give us language. They evolved this way so our ancestors could sound bigger and scarier. The ability to speak complex languages might have just been a lucky accidental byproduct of having a longer throat. Whether it dropped for speech or for intimidation, the reality of our anatomy remains the same. We have a fatal flaw built right into our necks. And for most of human history, it wasn't a massive issue. Evolution only cares if you survive long enough to reproduce, which most choking victims already had. But in the last 2 centuries, we changed the rules. We engineered incredibly soft, sticky, processed foods that bypass the need for heavy chewing. We have aging populations living well into their 80s, where the muscles required for that sub-second swallowing sequence begin to fade. Most uniquely, we are the only animal on Earth that insists on communicating while we eat. The act of swallowing requires your airway to be completely sealed off. The act of speaking requires it to be open. When you tell a story at a dinner table, you are running 2 highly incompatible software programs on the exact same hardware. And the risk skyrockets. Our bodies are incredible, deeply flawed machines built on millions of years of compromises. So the next time you sit down for a meal, remember the evolutionary tightrope you're walking. And more importantly, learn how to do back blows and the Heimlich maneuver. Because when the system fails, silence is the only warning you're going to get.